So, Airaid's MXP series cold air intake that I've got with me today is going to be one of our most popular intakes for the 11 and 14 V6, and that is for plenty of good reasons. Number one, it is an affordable intake. Number two, it provides some added power and an improved throttle response. And number three, the SynthaFlow oiled filter does a great job and it looks good under the hood. Now this intake is CARB certified, so it's legal in all 50 states. Gets an easy 1 out of 3 wrenches on my difficulty meter. It should take you no more than about 30 minutes to get the install done. Now numbers are what matters most, right? So we went ahead and strapped our Mustang down on the dyno, and with a stock run it made 266 horsepower and 258 pound-feet of torque. We then installed the Airaid MXP with a basic tune, and we found total gains of 6 horsepower and 6 pound-feet of torque, but what matters most, what you're gonna feel driving around on the streets, we made curve gains of a pretty impressive 21 horsepower and 38 pound-feet of torque. Now this intake is tune optional, doesn't need a tune to run, and without a tune I would expect you'll get high single-digit, maybe low double-digit gains. Now I personally like the Airaid intake for a few other reasons. I am personally a fan of open air boxes. I think that they look great. Unfortunately, some open air box designs kind of lose the cold part of the cold air intention. I'm referring to the fact that the filter is not enclosed completely and therefore not insulated from the heat in your engine bay like the factory air box does. However, Airaid did do a nice job building the half shell box on here, as you can see. It fully insulates the filter with the hood down and it retains the factory air inlet, so you are still getting a nice cold air induction setup. However, you are getting that open element look with the hood up. I like the Airaid because it looks like it just belongs. The black trim and the intake tube very nicely matches the factory intake manifold, but at the same time it cleans up that underhood appearance quite nicely. And like I mentioned, I like the price too. As far as cold airs go, this is about the most affordable open air box that still includes a decent cold air setup with the half shell that you see here. Some of the less expensive options that you might be comparing this against will probably have a more minimalist heat shield, or they will simply be an open intake tube and filter with no true air box. They might look good, but keep in mind you might lose some of that insulation. Again, this gets an easy 1 out of 3 wrenches on my difficulty meter, so let's head over to our garage and let's get started. First things first, we're gonna disconnect our air box from the vehicle. To do that, we're gonna disconnect our MAF sensor from the wiring harness, we're gonna loosen the clamp that holds the air box to the vehicle, and we're actually gonna loosen the bolt that clamps the air box to the vehicle as well. To disconnect your MAF sensor, you're gonna pull on the little red tab, that's the locking tab, that's gonna allow you to pull it off of the tube. Might help if you use a screwdriver. Then you're gonna loosen the clamp right here with a flathead. And then you're gonna loosen the bolt, like I said, the bolt holding the air box to the vehicle, and that's gonna be a 10mm socket. Now hold on to this bolt because you're gonna reuse it when you install your new air box. All right, with your air box disconnected electronically and physically, you're gonna just pull the intake tube off, and you should be able to pop the air box out with little effort. Your MAF sensor might be connected to the air box through the wiring harness right here. If that is the case, you can just pop it off with that screwdriver. Once that's free and clear, you can pull the air box out. All right, now we're gonna pull the intake tube from the throttle body. Before we do that, we're gonna disconnect these 2 lines. This is your brake aspirator and this is your PCV valve. All right, with those 2 lines disconnected, you're just gonna loosen the last clamp, and that's holding the intake tube to the throttle body itself. Once the clamp is loosened, just pull it directly off the throttle body. Now that we have our factory air box pulled from the vehicle, we're gonna be pulling some original hardware off of here, transferring it to our new air box. Now the instructions get a little wordy with measurements and fittings and all that kind of stuff. I'm gonna simplify for you. We're gonna be using 3 rubber grommets, these 2 here and this one here. And we're gonna be pulling the mass airflow sensor so we can transfer it to our new intake tube. Now these 2 rubber grommets you can just pull off by hand. And you can transfer them over to your new air box like so. They're just gonna rest there, they don't really clip in. Do it like that. Do the same with the other one, and just let it rest on the bottom there. Now you're gonna pull out this little metal sleeve. This is the grommet that held the 10mm bolt to the body. Slides out pretty easily, like so. Then you can flip it over and just push the rubber grommet out from the hole itself. All right, so once we've pulled that rubber grommet for the 10mm bolt out, the last step is pulling our factory mass airflow sensor. You're gonna use the T25 head that they provided in the kit and just use standard screwdriver. Now you can discard these because the kit comes with new bolts for your intake tube. All right, so with your mass airflow sensor pulled, you can officially discard your factory air box. Now we're gonna go ahead and install the mass airflow sensor on our new intake tube, and that is going to be done with the button head bolts and an Allen key. All right, now you're gonna stick the mass airflow sensor inside the intake tube, and there is only one way that it can go. You want the sensor itself facing this coupler. If you put it in the wrong way, your holes will not line up. So it's kind of a fail-safe there. So make sure you have it oriented the correct way. Grab your Allen head bolts, hand thread these, and then tighten them down with that Allen key. Now when you're tightening these down, you want to make sure you don't over-tighten it since we are working with plastic. If you do crack the plastic, you could allow unmetered air into your system, and that could cause a lean code. So just get them tight, and then do one more quarter turn on them, and that should be sufficient. All right, with our mass airflow sensor installed on our new intake tube, the last step is installing that third grommet on the new air box. You're gonna put it in the same way it came out. Go ahead and put the rubber grommet through the hole here. Make sure it's nice and flush, and then insert that metal sleeve for your 10mm bolt. All right, with that metal sleeve installed for the 10mm bolt, our air box is all ready to go. We're gonna work on our air intake tube a little bit more here. We're gonna install our aluminum fitting with rubber grommet, and since we're working on an automatic car, we're also gonna install this barbed fitting right here into these plastic threads. Now, if you're using a manual car, you will not need that hose, and you can instead use the plug that Airaid provides with the kit. All right, first things first, you're gonna grab that rubber grommet that is supposed to hold the aluminum fitting, and you're gonna place it into the hole made for that aluminum fitting. Make sure it's nice and flush. Then you can grab the aluminum fitting and slide it into place. All right, once your aluminum fitting is in place, again, depending on your vehicle, you're either gonna use the plug or you're gonna use the barbed fitting. Like I said, we're gonna be using the barbed fitting since we are working with an automatic. It just threads right into the hole. Now you should be able to hand thread this on here. We want to be careful again when working with plastic threads. Once you get it all the way on there, you might have a little bit more space to go, and you can use a 14mm wrench to drive it home. All right, so our intake tube and our air box are all ready to go. We can now start installing the Airaid MXP system into our vehicle. All right, we're gonna start with our new air box, and we're gonna insert it into the factory air inlet. We're gonna go ahead and reinstall that 10mm bolt. Now, these grommets do come off. They're not really held on tight, so make sure you don't lose them. You can just place them in the holes on the body, and then you can let the air box rest on them as you install it. All right, with your air box installed, you're gonna grab that 10mm bolt, thread it back through your metal sleeve. Go ahead and hand tighten it a bit, and then you can drive it home with your 10mm socket. All right, our air box is now installed. We're gonna go ahead and put our weather stripping over the top of it, and that's gonna help insulate your new air filter from the heat of your engine bay with your hood down. All right, so now our weather stripping is installed. Airaid provides you with some nice little stickers. If you want to, you can put one on the inside of the heat shield here, like the instructions say. All right, now we're gonna install our intake tube into the vehicle. To do that, you're gonna grab that rubber coupler included with the kit, and you're gonna grab the smallest band clamp, slide it over the small end, and attach it to your throttle body. All right, with the rubber coupler installed on the throttle body, you can leave that loose. It's gonna be snug either way. You're gonna go ahead and grab your middle largest band clamp, slide it over the larger side of the coupling, and you're gonna slide the intake tube inside of the coupling, and that will complete the install of the intake tube on the throttle body. All right, with your intake tube installed in the coupler, go ahead and make sure it's flush on both ends, and you can tighten down these two band clamps with your flathead screwdriver. All right, with our intake tube installed and pushed through the air box, we're now going to connect the intake tube to the air box itself. You're gonna use the two larger button head bolts provided in the kit and an Allen head key to do so. All right, our intake tube and airbox assembly are now connected. The last step of installing the intake itself is installing the filter. So you're gonna grab the largest band clamp, slide it over the rubber portion of the filter and connect it to the intake tube and tighten it down. All right, the last step in our install is reconnecting all of our tubes right here and our mass airflow sensor. So you're gonna go ahead and plug in your mass airflow, same spot that it originally connected. Make sure that red clip is pushed in all the way. Then you're gonna reconnect your aspirator hose and you're gonna reconnect your PCV valve. All right, so with our mass airflow sensor and our hoses reconnected, that actually wraps up our install of the Airaid MXP intake system for your 11 to 14 V6. I'm Travis, thanks for watching, and for all things Mustang, keep it right here at AmericanMuscle.com.